Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my mini art talks. I started yesterday, and today I am going to do number 2. I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to do Sandro Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, if I can get it up here for you. There we go, and I'll make myself a little smaller here so you can see the image. This is Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. It was painted around 1484, and it can be found in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Before I do start to talk to you about this painting, I did want to add one very quick thing to my talk from yesterday. And that is a friend of mine told me that she was a little disappointed that I didn't cycle back and tell you why I had mentioned that I felt this plaster cast, which artists use in their studios, why it might have been it might have become a death mask. And she was exactly right. Indeed, I didn't. So I'm going to do that right now. And it relates to the chandelier in the picture. Now remember, I told you that the double-headed eagle, the top of this chandelier, is a symbol of the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburgs. And why would Vermeer have put this here when the Dutch Republic had been born, had fought very hard to break away from the Holy Roman Empire? And that's because if you notice, the chandelier has no candles in it. There's no light coming from the chandelier, no light coming from the Holy Roman Empire. It's been extinguished by the new Dutch Republic. And the light is all coming in from outside, from the country of the Netherlands, from the Dutch. And so therefore, the death mask could be relating to the death of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what was in Vermeer's mind. It's just one interpretation, but that's the wonderful thing about art, is you can interpret it in so many different interesting ways. So that's what you have about that. So let's get back to Botticelli now. So this is, of course, very famous painting in art history. Almost everybody might not know it's by Botticelli, but they've certainly seen it sometime in their lives. Now I'll tell you just very quickly a little bit about Sandro Botticelli. He spent almost his entire life in Florence. He was born in 1444, died in 1510, and he only left Florence for 1 year, and that was in 1481 to 1482 when he went to Rome, because he was given the commission to paint 3 frescoes in the newly built Sistine Chapel. Now, of course, this is before Michelangelo painted the ceiling, but around the whole sides of the chapel are frescoes, and Botticelli painted 3 of them. But this painting, and those, of course, are all scenes from the Bible. This painting is the very first large-scale Renaissance painting with a non-religious subject, with a secular subject. And of course, this is the subject here is mythology. And this was never painted before, so Botticelli was really entering new territory here. He had to decide how he wanted to portray this, so it's totally unique to him, and it's totally based on comes out of his imagination, based on the stories that he heard or may have even read from Greek and Roman antiquity. So it's a very picturesque and classical myth, the birth of Venus, but it comes out of a totally gruesome story. Now, heaven, Uranus, and earth, Gaia, mate, and they produce the Titans, the first humans. And one of their sons, one of these Titans, is Kronos, Greek, Saturn, Roman, and Kronos cuts off his father's genitals with a scythe or a sickle, and he throws them into the sea. And it is out of the foam that's created from that Venus springs fully formed. So here you have the goddess of love and beauty and laughter and marriage coming out of this totally grisly tale. Interesting. Now, the painting was a commission from Lorenzo de Medici. And the de Medicis, you know, were the rulers of Florence, and they were great art patrons as well. And they owned a statue of Venus that was in the same pose that you see here. And certainly Botticelli saw that before he began to paint his picture. But I'd also just like to say about that these Renaissance patrons like the Lorenzo de Medici and Renaissance artists, they had a great admiration for antiquity. And so Lorenzo owned that statue, and Botticelli painted his Venus looking very much like a statue. Look at her flesh. It almost looks like it's marble. This idea of antiquity was very important in Renaissance art. Even scenes from the Bible, you might have the Holy Family in the manger, but the structure is Romanesque or Greek architecture. And that's because these artists and the patrons who paid them had this tremendous admiration for those days. And this is what the Renaissance was, the rebirth of these ideas. So now let's talk about who is actually in this painting. So let's go up here to the left, and we see here this figure here with the wings and the billowing fabrics. This is Zephyr. He is the west wind, and his job was to get Venus from the ocean to shore. And you see him blowing her in. See the west wind blowing her into shore. And who is he with? Who is this? Well, this is his consort, and her name is Cloris. She's a nymph, and she is kind of always with him. Cloris is there to make Zephyr happy in any way that she can. And Zephyr was the son of Aurora, or son of the dawn. And as you can see, he's here. He has a very important role to play, gently propelling her to shore. Now, these three figures that are in the painting, look at how they are located in the very foreground of the painting. The background actually looks very flat in a lot of ways. And the figures almost look like they're pasted cutouts onto this background. Very kind of interesting, because it certainly captures our attention, even though the background is kind of interesting here as well. So let's continue on from Zephyr and Cloris, and there's Venus. I'm going to get back to her a little bit later on, but let's look at this figure on the right here, on our right, and Venus's left. Now this figure is called the waiting hour, and the hours, there were 4 hours, and they represented the 4 seasons. And this particular one represents spring. And spring, of course, is all about renewal and all about rebirth, just like Renaissance, right? And she is receiving Venus. And we know that she's spring. Let me get a little close here too. Because of her of how she is dressed. Look at her dress and her robes. Delicately intertwined in all of this fabric are these beautiful flowers. These are definitely cornflowers here. And some people have said that she is Flora, who was the goddess of the spring. And in some of Botticelli's paintings, actually, Cloris, the nymph who's with Zephyr here, and Flora kind of intertwine and become the same person. But the idea, no matter how you interpret exactly who she is, the idea is the same thing. It's spring, it's renewal, it's rebirth. And that's what this is all about. And you see here, she's being very protective of Venus. She's almost looks like she's taking this cloak to protect Venus and clothe her with that cloak, perhaps. Also, which is interesting around this figure here, notice this high-waisted kind of girdle here. What you have is, these are pink roses. Can you see the roses here? I'll tell you a little bit more about roses in a minute. And then around her neck and shoulders here, you have almost kind of like a shawl or a boa in a way. And this is green myrtle. And green myrtle was always a symbol of everlasting love. So there you have, Venus is the goddess of love. So she's being protected by someone with this beautiful scarf of myrtle of everlasting love. Now let's go back and look at Venus. She is the idealization of classical beauty. She has this wonderful faraway expression on her face. It's almost as if she's withdrawn into her own world. And in fact, the whole painting is really otherworldly. We don't see anything like this uh, in the natural world as well. But the last thing I just wanted to talk about before I go are all of these roses that are infused all throughout the painting, including, of course, here in the girdle that the hour wears. Now, roses were Venus's sacred flower, and mythology tells us that the roses were created at the same time that was created. So the fact that Botticelli puts them all throughout this painting is not an accident. It was very, very deliberate. And um, the roses, of course, are a symbol of exquisite beauty, and we know their wonderful fragrance. And we do associate roses as a symbol of love. You think, what kind of flowers do you give on St. Valentine's Day? You give roses, long-stemmed roses, because they are the symbol of love. But also, don't forget that roses have thorns, and that reminds us that love can be painful as well. So maybe Venus, born out of this horrible, painful, and grisly act, is the goddess of love and beauty. So that's what I have to say about this painting, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I just want to encourage everybody to go over to my Facebook Art Talks page, and you can get there by just putting Art Talks Janet Mandel in this little box with the magnifying glass. And when you click on it, other Art Talks may come up, but look for this logo and you'll know that's my page. And besides having these talks on the page, I also have other interesting things that I think you'll enjoy and that can keep us busy during this time when we're all being very good and staying indoors. So thanks for joining me for talk number 2, and I'm going to try to do these every day, and I hope to see you again. So thanks very much. Leave some comments if you like. I'd appreciate that, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again for coming. I appreciate it. Bye-bye now.